Nothing else that you can do with a relatively small piece of wood offers the enjoyment and sense of accomplishment that you can get from wood turning. But success at the lathe depends on three important elements: an understanding of certain fundamental principles, practice, and above all, correctly shaped and properly sharpened tools. Hello, my name is Jeff Farris. I have been demonstrating the Tormek water-cooled sharpening system all over the United States since 1993. And for my personal tools, I would use nothing else. Why? Because I've tried just about every method out there. And once you've learned to use the Tormek system, there just isn't anything else that matches it for speed, versatility, or repeatability. The Tormek development staff has worked diligently over the years to fine-tune the Tormek system to be the best possible method for any turner to maintain his tools, whether he turns every day or just once in a while. Some recent developments in the system have really pulled it together, and we're now calling the collection of equipment and techniques that we use on wood turning tools the Tormek TNT sharpening system, which stands for touch and turn. I think you'll see it's really dynamite. Whether you already have a Tormek or are considering buying one for your wood turning tools, in this video I'll show you how to create perfect cutting edges on your turning tools and how to maintain those edges with a minimum of time and effort. If you'd like to learn more about how to use the tools, there are embedded video turning tips throughout the presentation. Just click the Enter button on your remote control when prompted to learn more about how to use a tool once I've shown you how to sharpen it. So I'm going to show you how to get your tools sharp and how to keep them sharp. I'll also show you some of the fundamentals about using them. And that just leaves practice, and that's up to you. To equip your Tormek to sharpen turning tools, you need the following jigs and accessories: the SVD 185 articulated gouge jig with its insert cutter arm, the SVS 50 multi-jig with both open and closed seats, the SVD 110 Torlock tool rest, the TTS 100 turning tool setter, the SP 650 stone grater, the TT50 diamond truing tool, the LA 120 profiled honing wheel, and a dust cover to keep all those lathe shavings off your machine. If you want to sharpen your turning tools quickly and accurately on your Tormek, you need to start with a thorough understanding of the stone grading process, the truing process, and the universal support orientation. The grindstone is a unique composition that offers two different cutting actions. Those two actions are controlled by how you condition the grindstone with the SP 650 stone grater. When you want to quickly remove steel, condition the grindstone with the coarse side of the stone grater. When you want a finer finish on the steel, condition the grindstone with the smooth side of the grater. The grindstone surface and the universal support have to be parallel with each other. To true up an out-of-shape grindstone, slide the TT50 onto the universal support. Fit the fork around the inside leg of the universal support and lock the TT50 on. Lower the universal support until the diamond cutting tip is resting on what you think is the highest spot on the grindstone. Spin the micro-adjusting thumb wheel down until it contacts the mounting sleeve, and then just a touch more. Turn the lead screw until the diamond cutting tip is off the stone surface. Raise the micro-adjusting thumb wheel up from 1/6 to 1/2 turn. Push down on the universal support until it rests on the micro-adjusting thumb wheel and lock it. Remember, you want to cut as little off your stone as is necessary. Dropping the universal support by a half turn of the micro-adjusting thumb wheel makes for a very heavy cut. I prefer to take a couple of light cuts if necessary instead of one heavy one. Start the Tormek and turn the lead screw knobs to feed the diamond cutting tip across the stone. Your stone is now perfectly round, straight across, parallel to the universal support, and ready for work. All of the Tormek jigs are mounted on or held against the universal support. The universal support has two mounting positions. In the vertical mount, the grindstone is turning into the edge of the tool. Use this mount for fast stock removal on skew chisels, for scrapers with long bevel angles, and for other tools where faster cutting is an advantage. In the horizontal position, the grindstone turns away from the edge, which cuts slower and gives you more control. This is the best approach for most turning tools. You can also turn the universal support around so that it works with the leather honing wheel. One key aspect of the TNT system that you will learn today is that you do not have to remove large amounts of tool steel to obtain a new edge. I'll show you how to put a perfect cutting edge on your turning tools in just seconds. But we have to make a clear distinction between shaping a tool initially and sharpening a tool. When you buy a new tool or begin using the TNT system, your tools may have the wrong shape. Shaping the tool initially will take longer. But once the tool is properly shaped, it can be maintained in just seconds. The key to success with the TNT system is to shape your tools once and then sharpen them forever. Accurately sharpening your tools requires that you carefully align the tool to the grindstone. And there are three ways to do that. First, you can mark the bevel of the tool with a waterproof marker. Now, place the jig on the universal support and adjust the universal support in or out until it appears that the bevel is resting completely on the grindstone. Now turn the grindstone by hand and take a look. If the marker is only removed at the back of the bevel, move the universal support away from the grindstone. If the marker is only removed at the cutting edge, move the universal support closer to the grindstone. The goal is for a slight movement of the stone to remove a stripe all the way from the back of the bevel to the cutting edge. This is a great method when you begin using the TNT system, but it requires some trial and error and adjustment. The other two methods are much faster and more precise. For several years, we have promoted the use of spacer blocks that you can make for every tool you own. If you control the protrusion of the tool from the front of the jig, the distance between the universal support and the grindstone remains constant for any given edge angle. So to instantly repeat a shape that we already have, you just need a stop block to set the protrusion and a spacer block that you capture between the universal support and the grindstone. Later, I'll show you how to make these spacer blocks customized to absolutely any tool geometry you desire. Now, the limitations of the spacer block method are that it requires you to spend a little bit of time in your workshop making the blocks. And as the grindstone wears, the bevel angle changes fractionally. You'll want to adjust your angles and make new blocks once the grindstone diameter is about 1 inch or 25 millimeters smaller than when you first made your blocks. Now that will keep your angles within a few degrees of your original shape. For most turners, that means you'll need to reshape your tools and make new spacer blocks every 5 or 6 years. One other minor drawback to the spacer block method is that you have to make some decisions about how you want your tools ground. Now for some of you, that is no problem at all. Either through training or experience, you know exactly what you want your tools to look like. But for many beginning and intermediate turners, choosing the proper shape for a bowl gouge, spindle gouge, or a skew chisel is confusing. For that group, we're introducing the new Tormek TTS-100 turning tool setter. Now this nifty gadget makes it absolutely goof-proof to create the shapes recommended by world-renowned turners on bowl gouges, spindle gouges, and skew chisels. Not only is the patented TTS-100 easy to use, but since it measures from the arc of the stone instead of from a single point, it is precisely accurate regardless of changes in the stone diameter. When we start sharpening tools, we will always show the TTS-100 method first. But if you want a shape not created by the TTS-100, we will also show you how to do custom grinds with the spacer block method. Okay, let's get to it. We'll start with the tool that we use the most but have the hardest time sharpening, the side grind or fingernail grind bowl gouge. That's a shame that this tool is so difficult to learn how to sharpen freehand, because once you've mastered sharpening it and using it at the lathe, I think you'll find, like most other turners, this is the tool you'll use for about 80% of everything you do. For the last couple of decades, almost every pro turner and most advanced amateurs have used some variation of this shape for the majority of their work. And thousands of them have sharpened their tools with the Tormek SVD 185 articulated gouge jig. But for those of you who have struggled a little bit with what that tool is supposed to look like, you are going to love the new TTS 100. You don't have to guess about where to start or stare at a chart of gouge profiles trying to decide which one you want. The TTS 100 is going to give you all the settings you need to make this bowl gouge, as well as one with a shorter side and 2 different skews. Now, this is the grind that I have demonstrated since the gouge jig came out almost 10 years ago. It's a 1/2 inch bowl gouge with the side ground back about 5/8 of an inch or 16 millimeters, and it has a 55-degree bevel angle on it. I settled on the settings for this after working with some professional turners and doing a lot of experimenting. And now this shape has been built into the TTS 100. I'm going to go through this pretty fast because I want you to see just how fast the TNT system is on the tool you're likely to be using the most. We'll slow it down and look at each step carefully on the next gouge we sharpen. Okay, the knuckle on the jig is at setting number 4. I hardly ever change that on mine. We're going to slide the tool into the jig. Then with the TTS 100, we'll set the protrusion from the front of the jig to the tip of the tool to 65 millimeters. Now, with the TTS 100 outer hole, the one furthest away from the contact discs, slide that onto the universal support and adjust the universal support in or out until both contact discs just rest on the surface of the stone. Lock the universal support and you're ready to go. Slide the jig onto the universal support, start the machine. Begin with the tool horizontal with the axis of rotation and make a smooth transition to the other side, stopping again when the tool is level with the axis of the jig. Smooth, controlled passes from one side to the other, going from horizon to horizon. Let's take a look. In just a few passes across the stone, with it graded to the 1000 grit fine finish, we've cut one new single facet bevel all the way around and thrown up a faint burr inside the flute. That was less than a minute. and the tool is sharper than any dry grinding system could ever make it. But if we want the ultimate edge, we're going to move over to the leather honing wheel and set the universal support using the TTS-100 again. Apply a bit of honing compound to the leather wheel. Slide the jig onto the universal support, and now we will polish that bevel to a mirror finish on the leather strop. It's a perfect match because we lined it up with the TTS-100, so a few seconds is all we need. Take the tool out of the jig, go to the profiled honing wheel, and take the wire edge out of the flute. Done. In less than 2 minutes, we have put the ultimate edge on that bowl gouge. Now that is fast. That is what we mean by touch and turn. Now, we'll put this one away and we'll sharpen another fingernail gouge. Except this time, we're going to start from a brand new factory square grind. Now most of you may know, some of you may not, new tools don't come out of the sleeve ready to use. They all need sharpening. But we're not just going to sharpen this one, we're going to put that fingernail shape on it for the first time. Remember, it's best to do this in stages. So even if you know that you want a long side on it eventually, for now, set your SVD 185 to jig setting number 2. Slide the tool in the jig and use the TTS-100 to set the protrusion to 65 millimeters. Now, use the TTS-100 to set the position of the universal support using the outer hole, the one furthest from the contact discs. That's the one you always use for bowl gouges. Now, grade your grindstone aggressively and thoroughly to 220 grit. Don't be afraid to lean on it a little. You can't hurt it. As you begin the shaping process, do not swing the tool from one side to the other. Grind one side at a time, working back and forth across the stone with firm pressure. Keep the tool level with the jig at the extreme edges of the arc. Don't drop the tool below horizontal or your cutting edge will end up inside the flute of the gouge. Once most of the material has been removed from the sides, start making smooth arc movements like you saw me use on the other gouge. When the tool has a single facet bevel that is continuous all the way around and the two side wings are uniform, you've got your new fingernail grind gouge. Now grade your grindstone to the 1000 grit. Firm pressure with the grater. Now refine the scratch pattern on the bevel of the tool. And we'll move to the leather honing wheels. Set up with the TTS-100. And polish the bevel. There we go. If you're new to using fingernail grinds, I suggest you use it just like this for a while. Jig setting number 2, giving you that 45-degree bevel angle. You may find with some experience at the lathe that this is exactly the shape that you want. It is the standard profile sold by several of the tool manufacturers that sell pre-shaped fingernail gouges. However, you may find that you want to pull the grind a little bit further back and that you want to shorten up the bevel. Now, a shorter bevel is going to let you keep the bevel rubbing on the bottom of a steep-sided bowl, and a longer side lets you take a more aggressive shaping cut. But as I said earlier, it's always best to do this in stages. Now, if you decide you want to pull that side on back, what I suggest you do is just change the jig setting from number 2 to number 3 and do everything else the same. Now you'll get a slightly longer side and a 50-degree bevel angle. Use that for a while and see what you think. You may decide that's what you want, or you may decide you want my shape, which is jig setting number 4 and the 55-degree bevel angle. Here are a few tips that might save you some frustration as you try to get accustomed to side grinding with your Tormek. Don't try to reinvent the wheel every time you sharpen. Altering the shape of your tool every time is going to waste your tool, your time, and your grindstone. If you find that you prefer a different shape for different types of work, buy 2 or 3 gouges and create a unique shape on each one, rather than taking one gouge and reshaping it every time you change what you're turning. While you will spend a little bit more money initially, in the long run, you'll save money and a great deal of time. Now, if you've read a book or a magazine article or attended a class that suggests a shape that is radically different from what you've been using, consider buying a new gouge to try that new technique. You may alter your favorite gouge only to find out that you were happier with it before. Despite the views of many turners, one particular shape is not necessarily better than another. The best shape for a side grind gouge is the one that works for you. Some of you more experienced turners may want a shape completely different from the profiles created by the TTS-100. The SVD-185 gouge jig can create a nearly limitless variety of profiles on both bowl gouges and spindle gouges. Look in the owner's handbook for this chart, which shows you the range of profiles that you can grind with a standard protrusion of 65 millimeters. Now, this page also gives you the complete settings you need for the popular Ellsworth profile. It requires a jig setting beyond the scale. It's where the 6 would be if there were a 6. On my jig, I drilled a small hole and put in a self-tapping screw so that I could come back to this spot precisely. The protrusion is 3 inches or 75 millimeters. On a new stone, the spacer block you need is 1 13/16 or 46 millimeters. On an older stone, say under 240 millimeters, match the existing bevel on your Ellsworth gouge with the marker method, and then make a spacer block. All bowl turners are looking for the same thing in a sharpening system. They want great edges, but they want them quickly so that they can get back to the lathe. They also want to get the longest life possible from their expensive tools. The Tormek delivers on all 3 points when used correctly. The key to success with the Tormek is finding the shape that works best for you, and then carefully and accurately repeating that shape. I suggest that you stick to the TTS-100 standards. We have patterned them in conjunction with many successful turners, both professional and amateur. We believe they represent the optimum shapes for successful wood turning. But if your particular work requires a custom shape, you can create and maintain that shape perfectly with the Tormek. For instance, take a look at the 6 gouges shown here. The top 3 are the profiles you can get using the TTS-100. On the lower left, I have a short beveled, short back grind 1/4 inch gouge that I use occasionally. In the lower middle is a medium back grind, similar to the one directly above it, but with a slightly longer bevel. And in the lower right, we have the Ellsworth gouge we just talked about. any shape that you want from the chart or from the TTS-100 requires the same 3 steps. Set the protrusion with the TTS-100 or a custom stop block. Set the jig according to how long you want the side wing, and set the universal support for the edge angle you want, which can be done with either the TTS-100 or a spacer block. Follow these 3 steps carefully every time you sharpen your gouge, and your success is guaranteed. If you would like to learn some techniques for using the side grind bowl gouge, hit enter on your remote control. Now you'll come right back to this spot in the sharpening video once the bowl gouge tips video ends. You can also access all of the tips videos from the main menu. The process of sharpening a fingernail grind spindle gouge is the same as I've just shown you for the bowl gouge. On a fingernail grind spindle gouge, the TTS-100 gives you a bevel angle of 30 degrees and a side grind profile ideally suited to detail work. Now we're going to use jig setting number 2 and the 55mm protrusion and set the universal support with the hole closer to the contact discs. Many turners prefer to soften the heel of the bevel on detail gouges and some bowl gouges, allowing access into very restricted cuts without interference from the heel. That's why the SVD 185 has this collar. If you unlock this knob and move it back, you can soften the heel of the gouge just this easily. Slide the tool forward and swing it around just as you did on the primary bevel. And you've created the relief angle at the back of the bevel. Honing on a fingernail grind spindle gouge is particularly important. The more time you spend with this process, the smoother the finish on your work. So spend a little extra time on the outside of that bevel, making sure that you get the entire bevel polished out to a mirror finish. Then inside the flute, roll side to side and make sure that you remove every bit of the wire edge. And you will get finished, polished cuts on your stock. If you would like to learn some techniques for using the fingernail spindle gouge, hit enter on your remote control. You'll come right back to this spot in the sharpening video once the tips video ends. You can also access all of the tips videos from the main menu. Most of your long grain projects, spindle type projects, are going to begin with a roughing gouge. Now the purpose of this tool is to take a 4-sided piece of milled stock or an irregular trunk section and turn it into a cylinder. If you think about it, the edge of that tool is going to take a great deal of abuse, either from the corners coming around and smacking it, or from the irregular section of the trunk making and breaking contact. For that reason, you want a relatively large edge angle, which results in a shorter bevel, 45 to 50 degrees or so. This yields a stronger edge that will stand up to the impact. Now don't confuse a short bevel with a blunt edge. We want this bevel to be upright with more steel behind the edge, but the edge should be razor sharp and polished out just as we've done on the bowl and spindle gouges. A keen edge that is well polished will remove the wood faster and stay sharp longer. Mount the gouge into the SVS50 multi-jig with the open seat. let it protrude 75 millimeters from the front of the jig as measured by the TTS-100. If you already have your roughing gouge at approximately the correct edge angle, paint a part of the bevel with a waterproof marker. And adjust the universal support in or out until it appears that the bevel just matches the grindstone. Turn the grindstone by hand and look at your mark. If you've removed the marker all the way from the back of the bevel to the cutting edge, you're properly aligned and ready to go to work. Start the machine, hold the entire front flange of the SVS50 against the universal support, and roll the gouge around in smooth arcs. The goal is to keep the edge relatively straight, create a single facet bevel, and raise a burr on the inside flute of the gouge. Now we also want to vary the position on the grindstone to keep wear on the stone uniform. But that will come with practice and experience. Once you've gained some experience with the system, you can become concerned with minimizing stone wear. In the beginning, concentrate on your tool. Shape the tool with the 220 grit cutting action. Then, use the stone grater to polish the grindstone to 1000 grit. And refine the bevel of your tool. The finer the scratch pattern is, the longer the edge will last. Now we'll move the universal support to the other side so that it is in front of the leather honing wheel and adjust it to match the bevel. The leather is somewhat forgiving, so if it appears that the bevel is on the leather, your alignment is probably just fine. Apply a bit of honing compound to the leather wheel, and now we'll polish the bevel of our roughing gouge on the flat strop. Then we'll finish by removing the tool, going to the profiled wheel, and taking the wire edge out of the inside flute of the gouge. And our roughing gouge is ready to go to work. Now, every time you sharpen the tool, you'll get exactly the same angle. You'll get your sharpening done faster, and when you go back to the lathe, the tool will feel exactly the same. I have one of these for every tool I own, except the ones covered by the TTS-100. Now, the same sharpening process you've just watched on the roughing gouge would be used on any gouge where you do not want a fingernail shape. For example, I like a forged spindle gouge with a straight across grind for certain types of work. And some bowl turners prefer a straight grind on a bowl gouge when working the bottom of a very deep bowl. These would all be done with the SVS50 multi-jig, just as I've shown you on the roughing gouge. The SVS50 multi-jig that I just showed you on straight grind gouges is also the jig that we will use to sharpen skew chisels, hence the name multi-jig. We start changing it by removing the clamping knob. And the V-block, which is called the open seat in the owner's handbook. The closed seat is how we're going to control skews, and it replaces the open seat. Then you can see that it's calibrated to adjust to any skew angle. The side and the clamping pad are V-shaped, and those are going to perfectly center the skew chisel in the jig. That centering in the jig is the first step toward creating two identical bevels on each side of the tool. The Tormek approach to sharpening skew chisels is unique in the industry. Nothing else on the market sets you up to grind both sides of the skew without removing the tool from the jig. If everything is perfectly aligned, you will get two identical bevels on the two sides of the tool. However, for this unique system to work, there are two issues that have to be addressed ahead of time. First, as we just mentioned, the tool has to be properly centered in the closed seat. Now the V-blocks will do that very easily on an oval-bodied skew, but on some flat skews, that can be a problem. The manufacturing process often leaves these corners very sharp. They can catch in the aluminum body of the closed seat or in the brass of the clamping pad and prevent the V-blocks from centering the tool. These sharp corners are also going to give you a problem while you're turning. They'll scar the surface of your tool rest and refuse to slide when you need them to. You can make your skew a more user-friendly tool, both at the lathe and at the Tormek, by simply softening the corners. I do it right on the Tormek just like this. Hold the tool at approximately a 45-degree angle and knock that sharp corner down. Do all four edges, and now your tool is going to move smoothly on your tool rest, and it will center reliably in the SVS 50. The other vital key to successful skew sharpening is alignment of the universal support with the grindstone. They have to be parallel. Bring the universal support down very close to the grindstone. Get directly behind it and look at the gap. It should be exactly parallel. If the grindstone is not parallel with the universal support, you need to use the TT-50 truing tool before you sharpen your skew. Since we're flipping the jig over for the second bevel, any inaccuracy between the universal support and the stone will be compounded and will result in uneven bevels on the two sides of your skew. Now some turners, including professional Richard Raffin, prefer a radius or curved edge on their skews. This shape is very easy to create and maintain with your Tormek, and the specific shape recommended by Mr. Raffin has been built into the TTS-100. First, use the 75mm protrusion stop in the TTS-100. Don't forget, if you have the older SVS 50, you'll want to either use the 65mm protrusion or cut 10mm off your closed seat. Set the skew angle on the jig to 30 degrees. Now slide the TTS-100 onto the universal support using the inner hole, the one closest to the two contact discs. Adjust the universal support until both contact discs just rest on the grindstone surface. As I mentioned on the straight grind, if you're putting a curve on a tool that is currently straight or are altering the bevel by a significant amount, work in the vertical mount so that the wheel is turning into the cutting edge. Our tool's already shaped, so we're going to do maintenance in the horizontal mount. Start the Tormek and use the pointed corner of the SVS 50 body as a pivot point to create the curve. The arc is not very wide or exaggerated. Don't pivot so far that the closed seat falls off the universal support. Vary your position on the grindstone to minimize stone wear, and keep the stone active using the SP650 stone grater. Once a wire edge has been formed on both sides of the bevel, grade the grindstone to 1000 grit and refine the finish on the bevels. Set the universal support in front of the leather honing wheel and use the TTS-100 to adjust its position. Now polish both bevels of the tool with the leather strop. The skew is now razor sharp and ready for work. Keep in mind, the shape is not created automatically by the jig. You control where on the bevel you concentrate the grinding, so you control the final shape you achieve. Avoid over-grinding the long point. That's a common problem. Now here are examples of what we feel are the ideal shapes for oval and flat skews. At some point in your turning career, you may want a shape on a skew not covered by the TTS-100. For instance, I've modified this half-inch oval skew to do detail work on goblet stems and lace bobbins. The skew angle is 40 degrees and the edge angle is 35 degrees. I've used it for so long that the blade length is too short for the TTS-100 protrusion measures to be effective, and the universal support has to be really close to the grindstone to get my bevel angle. So I made a custom 2-inch stop block, and my spacer block is 2 playing cards. When setting up custom skew grinds, you can either set a specific angle on the SVS50, or you can match your existing skew angle. To match your existing angle, mount the tool in the SVS50. Now put just a little tension on the skew angle adjustment knob. Draw a fine line across the stone with a ruler held against the universal support, like this. Adjust the skew angle until the edge of the tool perfectly matches the line on the stone. Now securely lock the skew angle adjustment knob. For the bevel angle, you can match the existing bevel using the marker method. Of course, once you have your custom skew angle and custom bevel angle set, the sharpening is just the same as I showed you earlier. Once you have the tool shaped the way you want it, record the settings on a Tormek recipe label and stick it on the ferrule of your tool. Then make a spacer block or count your cards to fit between the universal support and the grindstone. If you would like to learn some techniques for using these perfectly sharpened skew chisels, hit enter on your remote control now. You'll come right back to this spot in the sharpening video once the tips video ends. You can also access all of the tips videos from the main menu. The SVD-110 Torlock tool rest is used for profile scrapers of all types and sizes. Scrapers are tools for the final finish on face grain and end grain surfaces. They should not be used on long grain surfaces. There are often questions about whether you should leave the burr on or take the burr off, and if you use the burr, should you keep the burr coming off the Tormek or should you raise one with a burnishing tool? Well, in my experience, when you have a Tormek in your turning workshop, you can make a scraper produce an amazing finish on your work. But to do that, you cannot expect a one-word answer to burr or no burr. If you're scraping end grain, remove the burr with the honing wheel and polish the bevel as well. This will give you the best finish on end grain. But exactly the opposite is true on face grains. On face grain surfaces, you'll get a better finish leaving the burr on. Now personally, I prefer to keep the burr from the Tormek. The edge created with a burnishing tool might leave a slightly smoother finish, but to me it's a little harder to control. It tries to take a bigger cut than I want to, even when I think I'm just barely touching the project. On face grain, you should try both, a Tormek burr and a burnished edge. See which one works best for you. But whether you burnish with a burnishing tool, you use the burr from the Tormek, or you use the clean edge that you want for end grain, you want the face of this tool polished out just like a mirror. You will be amazed at the difference if you've been using a scraper with that factory scratch pattern still on it. Get your scrapers out and polish the face of each one. It may seem like a time-consuming chore, but you'll be amazed at the hours of tedious sanding that you will not have to do. When you sharpen a scraper, the bevel angle is not terribly important, since the bevel is not used in making the cut. Remember, we're scraping, which means only the edge is touching the work. We're not writing the bevel. A larger edge angle with a short bevel is going to give you more strength. I tend to sharpen mine at about 60 degrees. Some pros recommend even larger edge angles, 70 or 80 degrees, almost straight up and down. Others lean the other way and say it needs to be 45 degrees. Well, at 80 degrees, you run a little bit of a risk of the back of the bevel catching the work while you put the tool on the tool rest. At 45 degrees, it seems to me that the scrapers lose their edge a little bit quicker. I don't run into either one of those problems at 60 degrees, so that is what I use. If you have your bevel angle close to correct, use the marker method to align the tool to the grindstone and follow the profile like this. Keep firm pressure down onto the tool rest so that the stone does not lift the tool. If you have a problem with the tool lifting, soften the heel of the bevel like this. This takes away the edge that the stone is catching. Also, you don't need a lot of pressure into the stone. Keep your pressure down onto the tool rest. If you're working at a relatively narrow bevel angle, 45 degrees for example, and you have a consistent problem with the stone grabbing the tool, try moving to the vertical mounts. However, in the vertical mount, a profile tool can damage your stone very quickly. If you sharpen scrapers in the vertical mount, use a very light touch and vary your position on the stone frequently. I shaped the tool with the stone at 220 grit. Now, I've graded the stone to 1000, and I'll refine the scratch pattern on the bevel. Once it's ground, we have to decide whether to hone or not. If you're working on a face grain turning and you want to use the ground burr, you're ready to go right now. If you're working on an end grain turning, or you're going to burnish a hook onto the scraper with a burnishing tool, we're now going to go to the leather strop and remove the burr and polish the bevel. For an end grain turning, we're now ready to go to work. If we're going to burnish a hook, we need to use our burnishing tool. To pull a burr, you can use a burnishing tool or the back of a bowl gouge. Clamp your scraper into a bench vise and apply a little bit of oil to the edge. Use a light pressure and roll the burnishing tool around the shape. The hook needs to be no more than about 5 degrees off of the edge angle. It can get a little tedious adjusting the Tormek tool rest to ensure that the bevel angle is being matched exactly. If you do a lot of work with scrapers, consider buying a second US 105 universal support. Now you can clamp the Tormek tool rest at the correct angle on the universal support and just leave it there. Put a drop of CA glue on the micro adjuster. And now everything is precisely calibrated. Take the universal support out of the mount with the SVD 110 still in place. The angle and the support adjustment will be right there for you the next time you want to sharpen your scrapers. And we can go back to work on our next tool. Over the last several years, many of the tool manufacturers have introduced scrapers with adjustable and replaceable tips. They come in a lot of various sizes and shapes, and some of the smaller tips for stock removal in hollow forms like this one are best sharpened with the Tormek tool rest. Make sure there's enough space between the front edge of the tool rest and the grindstone to have full clearance as you come around the corner of the tip. These replaceable scraper tips used to be really tricky. They work great. There's just not much to get a hold of when you're trying to sharpen them. The SVD 185 gouge jig includes a shaft made specifically to handle these type of cutters. Take the backstop collar off and slide the gouge clamp out. Now turn the sleeve around and put the scraper tip arm in and secure it with the locking knob from the backstop collar. Lock it securely because we're going to use that to spin it. Secure your scraper tip to the arm with the bolt provided. Now, slide on to the universal support and adjust the universal support in or out to set the bevel angle. Use the marker method to make sure that you're correctly aligned. Then roll the scraper tip around like this. For tips that you use a lot, make a spacer block. If you would like to learn some techniques for using scrapers, hit enter on your remote control now. You'll come right back to this spot in the sharpening video once the scraper tips video ends. You can also access all of the tips videos from the main menu. Diamond section parting tools, flat parting tools 1/4 inch wide or wider, and beading tools should be sharpened in the SBS 50 multi-jig with the open seat. Now on the thin ones it can be a little tricky to get the tool locked in, but once that is done you can sharpen both sides without removing the tool from the jig. That makes it easy to keep that cutting edge lined up perfectly with the center of the tool. If you use a fixed protrusion, you can use the spacer block method for setting all future sharpening. Hone the edge on the leather wheel for better edge life and cleaner cuts. Thin parting tools are sharpened using the SVD 110 Tormek tool rest. To set up, slide the SVD 110 onto the universal support close to the stone. Apply a little tension onto the locking knob. The tension should be enough so that the tool rest holds its position, but still moves easily. To set the jig at 90 degrees to the stone, hold a ruler on the SVD 110 and extend it so that it passes by the center of the machine shaft. Adjust the SVD 110 until the straight edge is lined up on the center line of the main shaft. Then adjust it down by approximately half the thickness of the tool you're going to sharpen. Place the tool flat on the SVD 110. Keep firm pressure down onto the tool rest and light pressure against the grindstone. Don't let the stone lift the tool off the rest. On single bevel parting tools like this, grind the bevel until it meets the fixed surface. On double bevel tools like this, make sure both bevels are ground to meet at the cutting edge. Polish the sides on the leather honing wheel to remove the grinding burr and minimize friction and heat in the cut. The Bedan, which is sort of a hybridized beading and parting tool, is best sharpened with the standard SVH60 straight edge jig. Keep the square edge index pins on the inside, which means you'll be putting the Bedan in opposite the way you would a normal chisel. Make sure that the Bedan is flat in the jig. Slide it onto the universal support and we'll set a bevel angle of 45 degrees using the Angle Master. Grind the bevel. Until you raise a burr. Then remove the tool and polish the flat side and the bevel on the leather strop, just like you would an ordinary chisel. There are dozens and dozens of very specialized turning tools out there. I hope that by covering the fundamentals in this video, you'll be well on your way to learning how to handle those specialized applications. But you're not completely on your own. In the Tormek TNT instruction book that came with the video, you'll find detailed step-by-step instructions for many of those very specialized tools, including several different types of the insert cutters and this elliptical spindle tool. Most of your micro tools are sharpened just like the similar full-size tool. In a few cases, some minor modifications are needed, and those are detailed in the instruction book as well. If you frequently use micro tools, consider the LA124 narrow profile disc set for the profile honing wheel. As you can see, exchanging them with the standard discs takes just a few seconds. The narrow set gives you a 2mm radius and a 45-degree V edge, compared to the 3mm radius and 60-degree V of the standard set. The narrow set works perfectly with small carving tools as well as your micro turning tools. We hope you've enjoyed learning more about the Tormek touch and turn sharpening system. But don't forget, turning is just one of the many applications of the Tormek sharpening system. It can also be used for carving tools, cabinet making tools, planer blades, knives, scissors, hand axes, and much, much more.